Acts 9, 7 through 9. Then with Paul, King James uses Saul, but sometimes there's confusion between him and King Saul, so I like just saying Paul the whole time because it's who he became. He was changed after this point in this. So then men with Paul stood speechless with surprise, but they heard the sound of someone's voice but saw no one. So it's interesting. Most likely Paul didn't actually see anyone. He just saw the light. And it's likely that they may have saw the light, but maybe not to the degree Paul did because they didn't go blind like he did. Maybe they didn't see the light at all. They just heard the voice. But the point of this is God spoke and God did this simply for Paul being there. Later, you got to think of Paul's influence. These men are following him to go do this. So you see how he's clearly got influence over them. And oftentimes those who have influence can be used for both negative and positive ways. So for Jesus to call Paul, most likely he's going to carry these people to the faith. These are probably going to be Paul's first converts to the faith. The ones God uses for Paul to convert to the faith. First ones he ministers to because they see this quick and sudden change in Paul. So whether they saw this light or not, it isn't stated, but they do hear this voice. So at this point, they got to understand, because at this point the Jewish faith is pretty much done. I mean, people are still following this religion, but no Jew is talking to God because it's about the church at this point. So for them to see Paul standing there and talking to God would have been something that wouldn't happen anymore with Jews. Because it's Christian movement at this point. Because Christ came. So we don't have to go to the priest at this point. It's intercession through Christ speaking directly to God. So this would have been something different to them. And also Scripture accepts at this point that Paul became a believer immediately after he submitted, once he saw the light. So they would have seen his different change in attitude. He was going to Damascus to grab Christians and bring them to death. So the fact that he's going this way, they're seeing that this ain't the plan anymore. So they're seeing something significantly different as they go, because they're still having to travel. That doesn't say how far, but they're not at Damascus yet. They may not be too far away, but they're going to notice the change in Paul. And oftentimes those who we have direct influence in, for them to see that God's true and God's who He says He is, they just have to witness the change in us. And this may be why they didn't necessarily understand what Paul was speaking to, but I think later Paul would be used to lead them to the faith. Verse 8 and 9. As Paul picked himself up off the ground, he found that he was blind. He had to be led into Damascus, and was there 3 days blind, going without food and water all that time. Now, this could have been a period of fasting he was taking, but more likely it was just he just didn't eat. It's because it doesn't say he was fasting. Oftentimes in Scripture when somebody's fasting, it just says they were fasting. And let's see, King James says neither did eat nor drink. Doesn't use the term fasting. Maybe he was so focused on what happened to him, and maybe he was thinking of what happened. Also, it doesn't mention he was praying either, and prayer and fasting go together. But God would use this time regardless, because instead of going there, because Paul could have, after he went blind, could have still carried out the mission, been vengeful because of him being blind, and carried these people to and used his help to carry the Christians to where they were going anyway. So he still could have went through it, but the fact that he just did without doing anything for 3 days shows that maybe he's trying to understand the purpose of what God just did or what just happened, or see, because eventually he does seek out Ananias, which is the next verse, but I won't go into it tonight. So he does. I feel God uses this period in time, and sometimes we just have to have periods of time where we stop and wait. And I think that's what this Paul was doing by not eating or drinking. He was just stopping and waiting. And oftentimes that will happen after a change of direction, which Paul just had. He's going one way, and then God stopped him in his tracks. Now he's waiting on God to carry him another way. And sometimes, I ain't saying prayer and fasting is bad. Scripture says we should do them. But sometimes we just have to stop and wait. Prayer and fasting is for seeking God. It's what it's intended to, draw close to Him to where we can seek Him. But sometimes we can seek Him, but He still wants us to wait because the timing ain't right. And I think that's what Paul was doing by not eating or drinking. He was just waiting.